Okay, guys, so this is a review of the homework last night, the Industrial Revolution textbook scavenger hunt. It actually goes over 2 reading sections. In the digital version I have here, it's chapter 19, sections 1 and 2. Most of the questions actually come from section 2. So we'll see here, I've got section 1 pulled up here, and then I'll be able to pull up section 2 afterwards. I'll be flipping back and forth, finding answers between these for you guys. Okay, question 1 says, where did most people live before the Industrial Revolution, and what kind of work did they do? This is one of those situations where we've really already covered this. Unit 5, Section 1, the one we're quizzing over today, it already covered this. It talked about how people lived before the Industrial Revolution. So, but we're going to find it here. The dawn of the Industrial Age. For thousands of years following the rise of civilization, most people lived and worked in small farming villages. So there's our answer. They lived and worked in small farming villages. This is going to be one of those situations where I keep typing and then erasing it. What kind of work would you do in a small farming village? I'll let you guess. They farmed, okay? It was a long, slow process where production shifted from simple hand tools to complex machines, okay? It wasn't sudden or swift, but it certainly seemed like it. It felt like it to the people who were in it. So they farmed land. And they got things from the land that they needed, okay? Without getting too complicated, that was kind of the gist. The second question asks us, what was enclosure? And it's the whole reason why we do this reading section, because I want to make sure everyone understands enclosure. It was a big deal, and it changed the way people lived. 1750, most people worked the land using handmade tools. That's what we just said. They lived in simple cottages, lived by fire and candles. They made their own clothing and grew their own food. They might exchange goods at a weekly outdoor market, like a farmer's market. They didn't know much about any life beyond their village, and only a handful of people traveled from village to village. Okay. Some people went across the seas, but they were considered adventurers. At the onset of the Industrial Revolution, this way of life began to disappear. Villages had grown into towns and cities. Let's see. Agriculture spurs industry. So we see that farming methods improve. And as farming methods improve, enclosure increases output and causes migration. Okay. Rich landowners pushed ahead with enclosure, the process of taking over and consolidating land that used to be shared by peasant farmers. In the 1500s, landowners had enclosed land to gain more pastures for sheep and to increase wool output. By the 1700s, they wanted to create larger fields that could be cultivated more efficiently. Okay. The British Parliament helped make this happen. As millions of acres were enclosed, that is, they put big fences around larger fields, farm output rose. Profits rose because large fields needed fewer workers. This progress had a huge human cost. Laborers were thrown out of work. Small farmers were forced off their land because they couldn't compete with the large landholders. Villages shrank and cities grew. Okay, so what was enclosure? It was the process of consolidating land. It's the process of consolidating land. Put small farmers out of work. Increased food production. Here we have two things going on at the same time, right? Cost of food is going to go down, and the number of people needed to create the food went down as well. So we're going to have more people and less jobs. All right, that's going to be the effect of enclosure, and that's going to have a huge effect. And in my opinion, in our way, this points to the main reason why we're even learning about the Industrial Revolution, because anyone who's paying attention right now can tell that right now, food is about as cheap as it's ever been, and there's less use for people. There's less work for people to do. So we're looking at a similar problem today. And I think that the solutions that were found towards the end of the Industrial Revolution might guide us towards solutions for our current problems. What happened to the population with all of the extra food? I sort of spoiled that, but we can look. Oops. Population multiplies. The agricultural revolution contributed to a rapid growth of population. Why did it occur? Well, the agricultural revolution reduced the risk of death from famine because it created a surplus of food. But since people ate better, they were also healthier. And at the same time, people got a better idea of hygiene and sanitation and medical care. So less people were starving to death. Because less people were starving to death, there were more people. I'm just going to say a lot. Population increased a lot. Fewer people were starving to death, so there were more people. So we're sort of setting up some of the political turmoil we're going to see during the Industrial Revolution, where we've got more people and less work. And at the same time, we're going to have a lot of people getting very wealthy from the Industrial Revolution, and most people perhaps not. After reading about the French Revolution, you'll see there's a bit of a theme here. Okay, for the next question, we're going to look into the biography chunk, and it's actually at the end of this reading. It talks about James Watt. What did he improve on, and what is a watt a measure of? Let me clear this. Down.
What did you say?
Exactly. This guy, man. All right. James Watt. A clever Scottish engineer become the father of the Industrial Revolution. After repairing a steam engine, James Watt became fascinated with the idea of improving it. Within a few months, he knew he had a product that would sell, but he lacked the money needed to produce and market it. He was able to form a partnership with Matthew Boulton. They founded the Soho Engineering Works in Birmingham to manufacture steam engines. Watt's version of the steam engine had a separate condensing chamber and was patented in 1769. Eventually, a measure of mechanical and electrical power, the watt, would be named for James Watt. So our question, what did he improve on? He improved the steam engine. Many people will tell you that he invented the steam engine, and that's kind of true. The steam engine that he started with was built, it wasn't built to move anything necessarily. It was really a pump. The Newcomen engine, the engine that he started with, it was literally a very basic device, and its only purpose, the only way it was really used at the time was to pump water up out of tin mines in Britain. So when you mine, I don't know if you guys know this, but when you dig a hole in the ground, they tend to fill with water, and you need pumps or buckets or slaves dragging water up out of the mine. And the Newcomen engine was a device made to do this automatically. James Watt saw this device and said, hey, I can make this thing turn a crank that can, I don't know, run a spinning jenny or something like that. So He improved on the steam engine, and the watt is a name for mechanical power, I think is what it said. Mechanical and electrical power. So a watt is a measure of power. And that's something I actually used to get into when we learned Newton's laws. The next thing is I talked to you guys about work and power, but measure of mechanical power, how much work can be done over how much time. Okay. We don't really cover that in Unit 2 of science anymore because we were trying to focus on the math and setting up the algebra of that first. I didn't want to get distracted with too many different formulas. Okay. For this next part, we're actually going to close this. We're going to open section 2 of chapter 19. Britain leads the way. The question is why? Okay. Britain leads the way. When agricultural practices changed in the 18th century, more food was able to be produced, which fueled population growth. The agricultural changes left farmers homeless and jobless. These two factors led to a population boom in cities as people migrated from the countryside into towns and cities. This population increase created a ready supply of workers to mine coal, build factories, and run machines. The Industrial Revolution in Britain can be attributed to many factors, but population growth was just one of them. So right here, we can already talk about labor, right? Mark labor. The population boom created workers. Okay, so we need to look and see how land and capital had an influence on why the Industrial Revolution began in Britain. Why Britain? Okay. What characteristics of Britain made it ripe for industrialization? Okay, was it because British people were so smart and they were the ones who were going to create a modern world? Well, that's the way it used to be taught. It used to be taught that there was something special about British people that made it so that the Industrial Revolution was, of course, going to happen there. After all, the Enlightenment seemed to have begun there. But I think that we can point to some things about the actual land itself that made it possible for the Industrial Revolution to begin there. Britain had the advantage of plentiful natural resources, such as natural ports and navigable rivers. That means rivers that you can put boats on. The rivers supplied water power and allowed for the construction of canals. They made trade much easier, okay, and made it so we could bring goods to market. Britain was able to establish communications and transport cheaply, okay, because of its accessibility to the sea. Their plentiful supply of coal was fundamental to its industrialization and was used to power steam engines. Vast supplies of iron were available to be used to build new machines. Okay, so there were a lot of things here that we can talk about the land of Britain that made it special. Okay, first we said that they had natural ports, navigable. So you can navigate them. Navigable rivers. Lots of iron, coal, which were used to power the machines and to create the machines. Okay. It's worth noting it didn't hurt that Britain was an island and they were already a people that were used to using boats and doing foreign trade with boats. But we sort of lump that in when we talk about the capital. Okay. In the 1700s, Britons had plenty of skilled mechanics who were eager to meet the growing demand for new inventions. This ready workforce, along with the population explosion, boosted the demand for goods. In order to increase the production of goods, they needed a key ingredient: money. Money was necessary to start businesses. From the mid-1600s to the 1700s, trade from a growing overseas empire helped the British economy prosper. Beginning with the slave trade, the business class accumulated capital, or money, that was used to invest in enterprises. Britain had money. Britain had money. Britain had capital and money to invest in new machines. It came mostly from their vast overseas empire. And we're going to talk, actually the next unit talks a lot about Britain's vast overseas empire, but the old imperialism of Britain led to one of the reasons why it was able to do the Industrial Revolution, why it was able to begin there. Basically, Britain took over huge parts of the world, and it made it so that Britain was wealthy. They had money. It also made it so that Britain had some captive markets. They had some places where they sort of forced people to buy the stuff they made in their factories. We'll talk about that in January when we start talking about the imperial age, or the new imperialism. Yeah, I'm going to clear all this if you guys are happy with it. So might be a good place to pause if you're watching this on video. And I'm going to move down. The textile industry advances. In what industry did the Industrial Revolution first take hold? We already answered this in our lecture yesterday and in the homework that we completed yesterday, but we'll find it in the reading here because we'll talk more about it. The textile industry advances. All right, before we move too much further, this is one of the only good places where I've seen where they gave us a good picture of this device, this flying shuttle. This is a flying shuttle. We're going to talk about this later, but it was used to speed up the weaving process. Basically, it's a spool of thread or yarn, and they put it inside a wooden device that was easy to throw back and forth. It made it easier to weave. We'll talk about that going down here. Here we can see all of the iron and coal in Britain. You've got coal mines here. You've got a port here, iron or coal here. I mean, there's just mines everywhere. Wool farms. They had lots of places to farm wool. Okay, so the iron is the carts, and then these are coal fields. These are places where there's coal in the ground. So yeah, we can see Britain had lots of the right natural resources for getting an industrial revolution going. The textile industry advances. The Industrial Revolution first took hold in Britain's largest industry, textiles. So it began in the textile industry. Textile just means cloth, okay? Cloth is kind of is what you get from textiles, but textiles are used for making cloth. They're used for a couple of other things, but mostly it's for making cloth. Okay. It's fabric. 3 inventions of the Industrial Revolution, and what did each of these inventions do? This is what I talked about yesterday in that lecture. I was talking about we need to know the inventions and sort of the order of events, because these things do lead, one thing leads to another, leads to another. So first I want to talk about the cottage industry. This is also known as the putting out system. Okay. Basically, you would bring some cotton to people. You would come to a household, you would sell them some cotton, and at the end of the week, you would come back by and they would sell you some cloth that they made out of it. That was the putting out system, and that's sort of where the textile industry began. It's also known as the cottage industry. But that's the one we talked about. It's homemade stuff. And we still have some of this here in Ohio where we live. We still have some homemade industry. I know a couple of people who are, they're home bakers. They bake wedding cakes in their own kitchen, and they use these wedding cakes. They sell them to brides and grooms, I guess. And it's just homemade stuff that they do for profit. This cottage industry is not something that's gone, but it used to be just the way things were done. If you wanted to buy a shovel, you would go to the guy who makes shovels in his free time. If you wanted to buy soap, you would go to the lady who made soap in her kitchen. So that's the way things used to be done. One way to think of it is, if you can find it at the farmer's market, it is probably cottage industry or a remnant of the cottage industry. All right, our question is 3 inventions of the Industrial Revolution, and what did each of them do? So here we've got flying shuttle, but this is actually a picture of a loom. This picture is of a loom. This thing is a loom. The flying shuttle would have been a little device about this long that worked inside of that loom. And I'm going to show you an actual picture of a flying shuttle. It's this thing right here. That's the flying shuttle. Okay. Under the putting out system, production was slow. As the demand for cloth grew, investors came up with devices that revolutionized the industry. John Kay's flying shuttle enabled weavers to work so fast that they soon outpaced the spinners. Basically, they wove so fast that they used up all the thread they could get. All right. Flying shuttle. Much faster. Outpaced. They were weaving so fast with the new device that they couldn't find enough thread. James Hargreaves has a solution for this. Okay, he's going to tell us about it. Flying shuttle enabled weavers to work so fast they outpaced the spinners. Hargreaves solved that problem by producing the spinning jenny in 1764 that spun many threads at the same time. Later, Richard Arkwright created the water frame, which could spin even faster, and it was powered by water, not by somebody's foot. Spinning jenny, it spun many threads at one time. Water frame, spun threads using water. What we see here is one thing leads to another, leads to another. So the flying shuttle was a simple device that basically just made it easier to pass the spool back and forth as you were weaving. I'm trying to find you guys a video of weaving. But it would pass the spool back and forth as you wove. And then the spinning jenny was created so that they could make enough thread to let that work. The water frame was invented to be even faster and more efficient. Okay. So those are 3 of the inventions. There were others. There was, so, you know, we can see here that the flying shuttle used thread faster. Spinning jenny, it made thread faster, but to make thread, they used fiber right? Like cotton. So it makes sense that eventually we would have an invention that made cotton faster, right? And that was called the cotton gin, right? And it basically separated the seeds out of the cotton. And because we had the cotton gin, now we could use more cotton. So we had to grow more cotton. And guess how we grew more cotton? Well, the slave trade, of course, is how cotton was produced, and mostly in the American South, but also in India. So we can see these ripple effects of the flying shuttle. Suddenly we're making shirts so fast that we have to, we don't have to, but we decided to increase the use of slavery to produce enough cotton to feed those machines. I'd like to note here, I talked about the cotton gin, and here we have the word spinning jenny. Use a different color here. Jenny comes from the word engine. It was the spinning engine. The gin part here gives us gin. Cotton gin also has the word gin. So Jenny. Engine at the time wasn't necessarily something that was used to power a car. Engine, in its first use, this word just meant machine. It was a spinning machine. Okay, spinning jenny was a spinning machine. Jenny came from engine, which meant machine. Cotton gin came from engine, which meant machine. Okay. All right. How did factories come about? In America, these faster spinning and weaving machines presented a challenge: how to produce enough cotton to keep up with England. Raw cotton grown in the South had to be cleaned of dirt and seeds by hand, a time-consuming task. To solve this, Eli Whitney invented the cotton gin, separated the seeds from raw cotton at a fast rate. Okay. What we don't say here, we say that cotton production in the American South, right? What we got? Grown in the South. This was grown by slaves. Okay, so the cotton gin had an effect on slavery. It made slaves more useful and worth more, and so people had more slaves to grow enough cotton to feed these machines. The textbook kind of ignores that. I'm not a big fan of that. These new machines doomed the cottage industry, the putting out system. They were just too big and too expensive to be operated at home. Instead, manufacturers built long sheds to house these machines. At first, they put these sheds near fast-moving streams so they could harness the water power to run the machines. Later, these machines would be powered by steam engines, thanks to James Watt. Okay. Spinners and weavers now came to work each day in a factory. So how did factories come about? They were originally sheds. Because they were the engines were placed, right? Because that's what engine means. They were originally sheds where machines were placed, and eventually it just became a workplace, a place where people worked. All right, so we're going to talk about the transportation revolution. So at the same time that the Industrial Revolution took place, we also had a transportation revolution. And it was where we went from having lots of dirt roads crisscrossing England to having some more paved roads and canals, and also we had lots of new railroads. Okay, canals, boom. What were the canals used for, and how did they lose their importance? Canals, boom. During the late 1700s, early 1800s, factories needed a way to receive coal and raw materials. Okay. The Bridgewater Canal opened. It not only made a profit, but it cut in half the price of coal in Manchester. Okay. It set off. Oh, hold on just a second, guys. I had someone logging into a Zoom call across the table here, needed a password. So the canal set off a canal building frenzy. The canals were built to move goods. And the canals were used to move goods and materials. It was just easier to move something on a boat dragged through the water than it was to move it on a cart dragged over the road. We will see here that they lost their importance with the growth of railroads. That in the reading right here. Welcome to steam locomotive. It was the invention of the steam locomotive that made the growth of railroads possible. In the early 1800s, pioneers developed steam-powered locomotives to pull carriages along iron rails. It didn't have to follow the course of a river. It meant that the tracks could go places where rivers didn't, which allowed factory owners and merchants to ship goods swiftly and cheaply over land. The world's first major rail line from Liverpool to Manchester opened in England in 1830. The following decades, railroad travel became faster and railroad building boomed. Okay. So we see that railroads killed the canals. Okay. And our final question is, how did one thing lead to another? As the Industrial Revolution got underway, it triggered a chain reaction. Once inventors made machines that could produce large quantities of goods more efficiently, the prices fell. The lower prices made these things more affordable and created more consumers, who further fed the demand for goods. This created a cycle where things were cheap and so people could afford them, and so people wanted more of them. And so things got produced even more, and so they got cheaper and people wanted more of them. And we have this cycle. It caused a wave of economic and social changes that dramatically affected the way people lived. Okay. How did one thing lead to another? Well, goods led to more consumers who demanded more goods, which led to more production, which led to cheaper goods. It's a cycle. Okay. And you could probably write this with arrows. Instead of saying led to, you should say cheap goods, arrow, consumers, arrow, more goods, arrow. Yeah. But we could see that one thing led to another, certainly. And all of this would lead to, as the textbook said, all of this would lead to dramatic changes in the social life and the economy and the way people lived.